welcome back to video 3 of my Burnout Bouncebackability video series. Video 3 is all about recovery. Now when I talk about burnout recovery, I'm obviously talking about the period when your symptoms are either at their peak and then the period immediately after. The period when I assert that most people need to take some time out. I love the phrase bouncebackability, but I do need to lend a note of caution, and I shared my thoughts on this in video 1. For many, recovery from burnout needs to be gentle, sympathetic and calm. There will be some who can maybe take a few days off and bounce straight back, although I actually assert that those people are probably in some form of burnout prevention phase, and so it's good that you've caught it early. You see, recent research suggests that people who experience full-on burnout experience a change in brain state. More specifically, the part of the brain that manages the fight, flight or freeze response, called the amygdala, has been shown to be slightly enlarged, and the communication channel between it and the prefrontal cortex is slightly reduced. And the prefrontal cortex is where our cognitive executive function lives. So according to some of the most recent science, in burnout, we are ultra ready to fight, flight or freeze, and at the same time we have reduced logical executive thoughts, able to intercept and manage our more primeval behaviours. So people with full-on burnout need time to rest, recover, rejuvenate, before they can then go on to build resilience. You see, when I consider the 3 dimensions of burnout, that's exhaustion, disconnection and reduced professional capability, all of those dimensions may need significant amounts of time for full recovery. Now, because burnout is a syndrome and not a medical condition, there isn't a linear recommendation for recovery, but common wisdom would suggest a recovery period of 6 months minimum and at least a year or more as most likely for full recovery. You might need some weeks simply to stabilise, followed by a few months learning how to restore and doing the restoration work, and then finally some more months rejuvenating your enthusiasm and building some new self-resilience practices. That doesn't mean that you won't be able to function in that period, but I do recommend that you acknowledge that you are recovering from burnout and try, if you can, to manage your recovery given your work, home and social environments. Maybe even put yourself first for a change. Now, recovery is a huge topic, so in this short video I want to highlight 2 important aspects of recovery, and the first is to take small action steps. Later in the video series I'll be recommending several techniques that were successful for me and many others. But you know what? In the early days, going out for a short run or walking or doing some yoga or whatever might not be physically possible. You are likely to be exhausted. And similarly, you'll find many people, including me, advocating journaling of some sort. And here's the thing, at the very time that you need to take the stress away, you might start stressing about doing your journaling. And that's kind of counterintuitive. So start small and find what works. If your exercise is simply walking around the block for 400 metres or 200 or 100 or whatever, then just do that. Or if it means, I think that I'll journal when I feel like it, then do that. There'll be plenty of time in the future as your recovery builds to do something like a couch to 5k or to gratitude journal every single day, but maybe not right at the start of recovery. So start small and build. And now my second recovery recommendation is the following. Do what works for you. I assert that I have a very valid perspective on burnout based on my own experience, what my burned out clients share with me and my theoretical study. But my life experience and values will be different from yours. What works for me might not work for you. So if I go recommending something for recovery and you find yourself resisting it either theoretically or in the moment, then stop and question whether that action, activity or pattern is serving you. And if it doesn't, then try something else. And if it does, then carry on with it and build it into a new routine. To give you one perspective, as an example of my recovery, I took a few weeks off work before I started a phased return to the workplace. And maybe that's where working with a burnout coach or similar practitioner might have been beneficial, to lean on their experience about the importance of that upfront time away from work. Because you see, at that time I was a high-performing corporate professional, and like most driven professionals, I wanted to push through and to get back on it. I should have taken more time during that initial stabilisation phase. Had I done so, I think that my overall recovery would have been more effective. Hindsight, eh? And that initial period, not only could I have rested and stabilised, I could also have started to take an honest look at my work to see what was working for me in the workplace and what wasn't. It might also have given me some space to release all the built-up emotions that are so common with burnout. However, what I did do well in that initial time off work was to start understanding my boundaries and to put my own welfare first. And when I think about my return to work, I was able to set appropriate boundaries for what I would and what I wouldn't do. This has been a really short video on burnout recovery. Please seek out support for a more detailed and personalised perspective about how your recovery might best serve you. Finally, a summary of this video. Firstly, burnout recovery takes time. Think in terms of 6 months minimum, typically a year, and frequently longer. Secondly, I like to think of recovery as stages of rest and stabilisation, followed by recovery, then a period of rejuvenation, and finally resilience building. Thirdly, patterns of recovery will be similar, but every person's recovery will be different and unique. Fourthly, initial recovery in that stabilisation phase could be slow, gentle, and full of self-compassion. Similarly, in those early days of recovery, don't try to take huge action steps. Think in terms of small, minute action steps that gradually build over time. And finally, fifthly, do what works for you. Just because an expert like me tells you that something works doesn't necessarily mean that it will be good for you. It probably will be, but don't do it if it doesn't feel right. And so, moving on to next week's video, I want to focus on emotional release, as I believe this is vital to full burnout recovery. I'm Stuart at Unscrambled Heads. I'm a high-performance coach working with corporate professionals, executives and students. I have a focus on burnout recovery and prevention. Please follow, subscribe or connect to catch my Burnout Bouncebackability video series.